Hey, 8th grade. So our learning target today is I can solve equations with fractions. So we're still going to do the hand method today, but there's going to be some fraction work in there. I'm going to show you some different options when dealing with fractions, as most of the time fractions kind of freak us out. So let's first of all talk about the word reciprocal, because that might come into play in our work. Some of you will like this method, some of you won't. But remember what a reciprocal is. Some of you might remember, well, that's when you flip a fraction. You've heard about multiplication by the reciprocal before when you flip a fraction. So two numbers, real definition, two numbers whose product is 1. So here's kind of the definitional piece of it. 1 over a number is the reciprocal of x over the number because when you multiply them, you get x over x and it equals 1. So the example would be if you had 1/5 and you multiplied it by the reciprocal, by flip it, 5 over 1. When you multiply tops 5 and you multiply bottoms 5, you get 1. So the definition is that it has a product of 1. That'll come into play as we work down here, something called the reciprocal method. I was just showing you or reminding you in this top work. No really notes to take up here, just a reminder of what is a reciprocal. That's when you flip a fraction. And when you multiply them, you get 1. So we're going to take this equation here, and we're going to do it 3 different ways. I'd like you to start off by writing it 3 different times here. First time, second time, third time. Go ahead and catch up. And then after that, we're going to solve 2 different problems 3 different ways, which really is kind of like solving 6 problems because we're taking the same problem and showing you different options. And then by the end of the lesson, you kind of get to choose the method you prefer. So go ahead and get caught up there on copying those over. All right, so we're going to start with this method called the reciprocal method. So it's like when you flip a fraction. So hand method still is into play here. Our job is to get rid of this fraction 2/3. So the way that we could get rid of the fraction 2/3 is to divide. But instead of dividing by a fraction in math, we do something called multiplication by the reciprocal. So we're going to take it and flip that fraction to make it 3 over 2. Then to clean it up, I have 3 times 2, which is 6, over 3 times 2, which is 6. And what we've just talked about, 6 over 6 gives us 1, which is what we were saying, is that that's what reciprocals do for us, is they give us 1. So we have 1x equals. On the right-hand side, we have a 1 on the bottom, gives us 15 over 2. So our x is equal to 15 over 2. And if we were to put that in our calculator, we get 7.5, or 7 1/2. Now you would want to put that back in and check it in your calculator just to make sure it's correct. So you would say 2/3 multiplied by 7.5. Does that equal 5? You can just use your calculator on that check step. Feel free to use on the check step. Feel free to use that calculator. Sorry about that. So that's called the reciprocal method. It's where we take a fraction and we flip it to solve, because the opposite of multiplying by a fraction is division by its reciprocal. Or the opposite of, I should say, the opposite of dividing a fraction is what I meant to say, is multiplication by the reciprocal. Okay, this next method is called diffraction. I actually think that this middle method is going to be your favorite. So what we do is we take our hand and we cover the variable as we always do. And then what we try to do is we try to kill the denominator. So I might write that little note here for you. When we do fraction, we kill the denominator. So I'm going to cover all of that with my hand, the 2 and the x. I'm going to try to kill the denominator. Just looking at the denominator, it's divide by 3. So I'm going to multiply nice and high by 3, copy, paste. Working left to right then, those cancel and I get 2x on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, I have 15. So I have 2x plus 15. 2x equals 15 is what I meant to say. Sorry about my mistakes so far in this lesson. Then hand method kicks in. We're going to solve it for the variable x. So we're going to do the opposite of multiplication, which is to divide. Copy paste, and we get x equals 7.5 or 7 1/2, which is the exact same answer we got in reciprocal method. All right, so as we keep going then, we're going to solve for the variable x. This is a multiplication problem here. So we have 2/3, 2 divided by 3. We're going to put that in our calculator and do something called decimal method. So pick up your calculator, go 2 divided by 3, and I'd like you to round to the nearest hundredth. So you get 0.066666, but if I round to the nearest hundredth, it becomes 0.67. Drag that variable down, equals 5. Hand method then, solving for the variable x, we're going to divide by 0.67, copy, paste. Working left to right then. we get x equals, when I have that on the right hand side, I have 5 divided by 0.67 gives me 7.46. Now, anytime we're rounding it, we're going to need to use the approximately equal to squiggly line. So we get x is approximately equal to 7.46. Now, when we look at our answers here, we have 7.5, 7.5, and 7.46. So 7.46 is obviously very close to that. All right, so those are the 3 possible answers. Notice we took the same equation here and we solved it 3 different ways. Reciprocal, where you flip the fraction, defraction, which means to kill the denominator. I honestly think that will be your favorite, or decimal, where you turn it into a decimal. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing down here 3 different ways, the same problem. So I'm going to write it 3 different times. 2 multiplied by 2/3 x plus 8 equals 5. Defraction 2 multiplied by 2/3 x plus 8 equals 5. And then 2 multiplied by 2/3 x plus 8 equals 5. All right, so working left to right, reciprocal first. So it still starts off as the hand method. I still have to kill that parenthesis, so I'm going to multiply it through. So we have 2 multiplied by 2/3. I'm going to write a 1 on the bottom, and I have 2 fractions. When I multiply tops, multiply bottoms. That gives me 2 times 2, which is 4 in the numerator. 1 times 3 in the bottom is 3. Drag that variable x down. Sign in the middle is plus, and then take the 2 and distribute it to the 8 is 16. If I haven't used it, drag it down. The hand method kicks in, so we're solving for this. I subtract 16, copy, paste. Working left to right now, so we have 4/3. X equals negative 11. 4/3 x equals negative 11. Solving for the variable x, we use the reciprocal method, which means to take the fraction and flip it. So instead of dividing by a fraction, we multiply by the reciprocal. So we're going to flip that fraction. We have to copy, paste on the right-hand side. So I end up with 12 over 12, which is equal to 1x, which is what we wanted on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, I have to put a 1 underneath here. That gives me negative 33 on the top over 4 on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and simplify that. So we have negative 33 divided by 4. When I type that in my calculator, I get negative 8 and negative 8.25, or negative 8 1/4. So negative 8.25 or negative 8 1/4 would be my answer. Now I can plug back into check. So make sure you do your check step where you take this answer and plug it back into the equation and make sure it works out. Sometimes it doesn't work out perfectly when we round, but this particular one should be fine because we didn't have to round that answer at all. So that's called reciprocal method. When you're solving, when you're dividing by that fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal instead. Okay, defraction. So let's take a look at defraction. So we're going to use the hand method. We're going to distribute. So we take our 2 and we distribute. That's really like a 2 over 1. So when I distribute, I get 4 over 3. Variable is x, keep my sign. Then I take the 2 and I distribute to the 8, which is 16. I notice I do not distribute to the 5 because it's on the other side of the equation. That kills the parenthesis there. I'm going to go ahead and subtract 16, copy, paste. If I haven't used it, I drag it down. And we have negative 11 on the right-hand side. Now this is a step, I'm going to go ahead and erase this just because I need the space, where instead of multiplying by the reciprocal, what we do is we try to kill the denominator. Right now the denominator is divided by 3. I'm going to go ahead and kill that denominator by multiply nice and high. The 3's then cancel, gives us 4x equals. On the right-hand side we have a triangle problem. Negative 11 multiplied by 3 is negative 33. Hand method kicks in, divide by 4, copy, paste, and we get x is equal to negative 8.25. So notice we get the same answer for the problem on the left using the reciprocal method, the problem in the middle using defraction, exact same answer, no rounding required. All right, guys, and the very last problem then for today. And then in your homework tonight, you'll be able to choose your method you prefer. So the last problem over here, I'm going to have to erase some of this, guys, because of space. All right, so if you need me to if you need to rewind because you didn't get that, go ahead and rewind, but I'm going to erase that so I can move on. Last problem of the day, we're solving for the variable x. We are going to distribute, but before we do that, I'm going to change this fraction into a decimal. So we have 2 on the outside, we have 0.67x on the inside, plus 8 still in that parenthesis equals 5. Now notice the parenthesis is still there because I haven't killed the parenthesis yet. I have not used the distributive property. All I did was turn the fraction into a decimal Now, using the distributive property, we have 2 multiplied by 0.67. When I round that, I get 1.34, drag the variable with it, which is x, and then take the 2 and distribute to the 8, which is 16. I have a 5 on the right-hand side. Subtract 16, copy, paste. Working left to right then. If I haven't used it, I drag it down. Equals negative 11. Hand method kicks in. I'm solving for the variable x. Divide by 1.34, copy, paste, just like we've been doing. Now this problem is a little tricky because we did round our 0.666. We rounded to 0.67, which means it's probably not going to be perfect anymore. So when we divide on the right-hand side then, we end up with negative 8.21. And because of rounding, we're going to approximately equal that. So approximately equal to negative 8.21. Now it's not perfect because we were looking for negative 8.25 as our answer, but it's very close. And because of the rounding, we do have the correct answer there. So that's how you would solve a fraction. You have 3 choices. You have the choice of reciprocal where you flip, defraction where you kill the denominator, or decimal where you just put the fraction in your calculator, get the decimal, and then just go hand method the rest of the way. So for summary today, just a couple things. Remember that the fraction bar is the same as division. So if you want to put it in your calculator and use a decimal, you're totally fine doing that. When you multiply fractions, remember, if you're choosing to do reciprocal, you multiply top, multiply bottom, A times C over B times D. And you'll need that if you're doing any distributive property with that work as well. And then the last piece then would be, if you divide fractions, remember to stop, op, flop, and multiply the reciprocal. You get to choose the method you like the best. You have 3 to choose from. And don't forget to reduce your answers, like simplify everything. Okay, 8th grade. So your homework tonight is to get all the way through page 18, due tomorrow. You pick whichever method you prefer. If you like one of the methods better than the other, go with what feels good. If you want to use a different method for every problem, it just depends on what the problem looks like. I'm fine with that as well. Again, get through page 15. That's your homework for tonight. Have a fabulous night.